Imagine walking into a museum of Mustangs and discovering secret cars the brochure never showed. Cars born from corporate whispers, dealer defiance, and moonlit engineering sessions. From factory-ordered oddities to drag strip experiments Ford tried to bury, these are Mustangs Ford didn't want in the spotlight. Yet they escaped, each one a ghost of what muscle could have meant. Get ready to meet 10 Mustangs so rare, most purists won't believe they existed. Top 1. 1967 Mustang Quarter Horse Prototype. It looked like a Mustang, it drove like a Cougar, and inside, it felt like a Thunderbird. But it wasn't supposed to exist. This was the Quarter Horse, a Frankenstein prototype Ford built in secret and quietly erased from history. In 1967, Ford's design department was deep in experimentation. Mustang sales were booming, but management wanted to test new ideas for luxury performance hybrids. The result? A one-off Mule, combining parts from 3 Ford divisions. Underneath the skin was a Mercury Cougar chassis, complete with longer wheelbase and heavier-duty suspension. On the outside, it wore a 1969 Struce Smoke Mustang front clip, years before it went public. And inside? The dashboard was pulled straight from a Thunderbird, complete with wood trim and luxury touches that no production Mustang had seen before. It wasn't built to sell, it was built to explore. This car was never revealed to the press, it wasn't shown at auto shows, and when testing concluded, it vanished into Ford's private archive, only to resurface decades later in obscure design memos and photographs. Collectors didn't even know it existed until the early 2000s. Today, the only known unit has been painstakingly restored by enthusiasts, its history pieced together from scraps of internal documents. The Quarter Horse proved Ford was considering a Mustang evolution far more luxurious and radical than anything that reached production. Had it been greenlit, the pony car wars might have looked very different. More upscale, less muscle. But the project was shelved quietly, and its ghost remains a chilling what if. But not all of Ford's secrets stayed buried. Some of them ended up overseas, rebranded, repackaged, and forbidden to return home. Up next, a Mustang you could only get in Germany, and one Ford hoped Americans would never find out about. Top 2. 1966 Mustang Twister Special Prototype. Before Kansas got its iconic Twister Special Mach 1S in 1970, Ford quietly experimented with a storm of its own. But this one was smaller, meaner, and never meant to see daylight. In late 1965, Ford's regional managers began exploring the idea of limited-run performance Mustangs targeted to High Plains dealerships. The goal? Create buzz with regional specials, cars that felt exclusive without needing a Shelby badge. So before the Twister Special name ever became official, a single prototype was built in early 1966. It was based on a Wimbledon white GT fastback with blue rally stripes, Magnum 500 wheels, and an experimental dealer-installed decal that read Twister Special in bold script across the rear quarters. Under the hood sat a 271 horsepower Hypo 289, backed by a 4-spoon top loader and heavy-duty suspension. It wasn't as wild as a Shelby, but it was designed to feel special. Unique trim, a trunk Momo kit, and internal memos hinting at a full regional rollout by spring. But then it vanished. Internal approval never came. The car was shipped back to Dearborn, the decals stripped, and the prototype quietly reassigned as a pool vehicle. Most records of its existence were buried, possibly due to a conflict with Ford's growing Shelby partnership or a shakeup in marketing priorities. Only one verified photo remains, a dealer's Polaroid showing the car briefly on display in Wichita before it disappeared. Today, its VIN is untraceable. The real Twister Special didn't arrive until 1970, but this forgotten 1966 prototype shows the idea had been brewing years earlier. And while this storm was swept under the rug, Ford's next experiment took things even further. No stripes, no chrome, just a stripped-down Mustang, built to humiliate everything in its prized class, using nothing but 6 cylinders and sheer defiance. Top 3 1965 Mustang A/FX drag unit lightweight. It looked like a Mustang, but it wasn't street legal to be. This was Ford's outlaw experiment, built not for the public, but for war at the drag strip. and it wasn't supposed to survive. In 1965, as the NHRA's A/FX/A/Factory Experimental class exploded in popularity, Ford launched a covert assault. They took a batch of standard Mustang fastbacks and sent them to private builders under strict orders: cut weight, add power, break records. These cars weren't just modified, they were transformed into quarter-mile missiles. Fiberglass fenders, plexiglass windows, radiator deletes, acid-dipped bodies. Most came with high-strung 427 SOH camber, V8S or race-propped 289S, pushing well over 500 horsepower. With weight reduced to just over 2,500 PLs, these Mustangs could run mid-10s at a time, when 14s were considered fast. Only about 10 to 12 A/FX Mustangs were ever built under Ford's direction, many with no VINs or legal titles. These weren't sold through dealers, they weren't in brochures. They were quietly delivered to top-tier drag teams like Gas Ronda and Les Ritchie. Even Ford's internal documentation is spotty. Many were wrecked in competition or cannibalized for parts. Survivors are nearly untraceable. Ford never wanted the public to know just how far they'd pushed the Mustang beyond its limits. These were the muscle cars that didn't play by the rules, and weren't meant to. But while Ford's drag monsters were breaking records, another Mustang was about to break tradition, a prototype so radical it moved the engine to the middle, and Ford hoped you'd never find out it existed. Top 4 1967 Mustang Mach 2 Mid-engine concept. What if the Mustang had gone midstream in 1967? Sounds insane, right? Well, Ford actually built one, and then they buried it. By the mid-1000s, 960S, the Ford GT40 was winning Le Mans, and Mustang Mania was sweeping America. So a group of rogue engineers at Ford Special Vehicles had a wild idea. What if they merged both worlds? The result was the Mustang Mach 2, a sleek, low-slung, mid-trim fastback, built on a heavily modified GT40 Stride chassis. It wore Mustang styling cues, but everything else was radically different. The rear deck opened to reveal a high-pitched 289 Hypo V8 mounted behind the seats, mated to a 4-speed transaxle. Inside, the Mach 2 had 2 bucket seats, a minimalist dash, and futuristic controls. Unlike anything in Ford's lineup, it looked like a race car for the street, but it was never meant to hit showrooms. Only one Mustang Mach 2 was ever built, and after a few public appearances in 1967, including at the Chicago Auto Show, it mysteriously vanished. Some say it was destroyed in a crash test, others believe it was disassembled for parts. Its final fate remains one of Ford's deepest Mustang secrets. Ford never filed for production approval, fearing it would confuse Mustang buyers and cannibalize GT40 development. The idea of a midstream Mustang was too radical, too risky, so they erased it from history. Today, only a handful of photos and design sketches remain, but Ford wasn't done experimenting, because just a year later they built another outlaw Mustang, this time based on a Shelby, painted green, and equipped with technology so advanced even Carroll Shelby didn't know what to do with it. Top 5 1968 Shelby XP500 Green Hornet. It looked like a Shelby GT500, but under the hood, experimental tech straight out of a lab. And it wasn't just fast, it was forbidden. In 1968, Ford and Shelby were at their peak. But deep inside Ford's experimental garage, engineers were pushing boundaries. They took a standard GT500 and transformed it into a rolling testbed for future tech. Painted in a custom shade of green and dubbed the EXP500, this one-off prototype was never meant for public roads. The car featured independent rear suspension, years ahead of any production Mustang, and a fuel-injected 428 Cobra jet, mated to a C6 automatic transmission. Most Mustangs still used carbs and leaf springs. This one felt like it came from the 21st century. Inside, it had deluxe trim, a full console, and experimental gauges. The front end wore custom fiberglass. From the outside, it looked like a show car, but it drove like a racing prototype disguised in street clothes. Only one was built. After testing, the Green Hornet was supposed to be crushed like most prototypes, but it slipped through the cracks, quietly saved from destruction by a Ford employee. Years later, it was rediscovered, still intact, still street legal. Ford never mass-produced the IRS or electronic fuel injection setup from the Green Hornet. It was simply too advanced, too costly, and too far removed from the Mustang's master-groom mission. But this car proved that Ford had the tech and chose not to use it. The Green Hornet was wild, but it was still a Shelby. The next car? It wasn't even built in America. It wore a Mustang badge, but spoke German, and what happened to it next is stranger than fiction. Top 6. 1967. Shelby GT500 Super Snake Continuation. What if Shelby's wildest Mustang hadn't died as a one-off? Imagine if the Super Snake legend had multiplied, terrorizing drag strips and dealership floors alike. In 1967, Carroll Shelby took a standard GT500, dropped in a special 427 cubic racing V8, and dubbed it the Super Snake. Originally built to test Goodyear tires, this one-off ran speeds that made even Shelby sweat, over 170 miles per hour on a banked track. The plan? Sell 50 to the public, but the idea vanished overnight when the $8,000 price tag, twice a normal GT500, sent Ford's bean counters running for cover. No paperwork, no dealer network. The lone Super Snake became a ghost. Until decades later, when Shelby's shop decided to resurrect the monster. A handful of continuation cars were built to the exact insane specs. Hand-fitted, 427 side oiler, race headers, unique fiberglass hood, and that iconic Wimbledon white paint with Guardsman blue stripes. Inside, it's all Shelby. Wood rim steering wheel, roll bar and dash signed by the man himself. Unlike modern clones, these continuations carry Shelby's direct blessing. Some wear CSX serial numbers and were sold to collectors who dreamed of the legend that never was. These cars blurred the line between history and homage. Technically, they weren't Ford factory builds, but with original parts, Shelby blueprints, and real 427S, they're as close as you'll ever get to owning the Super Snake that Ford buried in '67. And because they exist, they challenge the myth that Ford always controlled Shelby's wild side. Sometimes, the legend escapes the leash, reviving ghosts Ford tried to kill off. But if a single 427 could make accountants panic, wait till you see what happened when Ford engineers tried to stuff a 429 Big Prompt into a plain Mustang S-code. A prototype so radical, it never wore the boss badge, yet changed everything that came next. Top 7. 1963 Mustang 429 Boss Prototype S-code test mule. Before the Boss 429 became a legend, there was a test mule Ford didn't want anyone to see, built in secret, hidden in plain sight. And it wasn't even a Boss, not yet. In late 1968, Ford engineers were scrambling to stuff the massive 429 Cobra jet engine into a Mustang engine bay. NASCAR was demanding homologation and time was running out. To develop the platform, they needed a stealth prototype, something street legal but completely under the radar. So they took a regular 1969 Mustang S-code fastback and quietly installed the experimental 429. It had custom motor mounts, hand-fabricated headers, and modified inner fenders to fit the massive block. It was used for testing drivability, cooling, and chassis balance, but never meant for the public. The test mule wore no Boss badging. It looked like an ordinary GT. But under the skin, it was the birth of the Boss 429. Only a handful were built, and most were either crushed or recycled by Ford. One or two allegedly survived, but Ford never confirmed it. If found today, an authentic 429 prototype would be one of the most important Mustangs in existence, but its very purpose was to disappear. These test mules were built in silence because Ford wanted the real Boss to make the noise. And while some Mustangs were hidden in garages and test tracks, others were locked in crates, sealed, and shipped thousands of miles away, never to return. The next one? A Mustang so rare, it spoke a different language. Top 8 1965 Mustang 4-door sedan prototype. Imagine opening your garage to a 4-door Mustang. Sounds insane? It almost happened, and Ford hoped you'd forget it ever did. By mid-1964, the Mustang was already a sales phenomenon. But Ford wasn't done experimenting. Executives wondered, what if they stretched the wheelbase, added 2 rear doors, and pitched it to families who wanted Mustang flair with Falcon practicality? So, design teams secretly built full-size clay models, and even one fiberglass prototype of a 1965 Mustang with 4 doors. The body retained the original Mustang's iconic grille, hood, and taillights, but the added rear doors warped the coupe's silhouette, making it look more like a boxy compact than a pony car. The concept also proposed a 289 V8 under the hood, enough performance to carry the extra passengers. Public response during testing? Lukewarm at best. Internally, the backlash was stronger. Designers and dealers hated the look, calling it a betrayal of the Mustang's rebellious image. Ford quickly pulled the plug and buried the project deep in its design vault. Only photos and rumors remained. The 4-door Mustang prototype was never meant to be seen outside of Dearborn. It was a corporate what-if that nearly diluted Mustang's identity before it was even fully formed. To this day, no known physical prototype survives, only one-off renderings and stories whispered by insiders. But if you think a 4-door Mustang was wild, wait until you see what Ford planned for the racetrack. Coming up next, a Mustang so light, loud, and purpose-built, it skipped dealerships entirely and almost got banned. Top 9 1966 Mustang 427 FE experimental drag car. In 1966, someone at Ford had a dangerous idea. Take the full-size 427 cubic inch FE engine, the same one used in Le Mans winning GT40S, and stuff it into a compact Mustang, not for mass production, just for war. Ford's total performance campaign was raging. They had the fastest NASCAR cars, the most dominant Le Mans machines, but on the drag strip, Chrysler's Hemis still ruled. So engineers in Ford's experimental division built several Mustang test cars with the monstrous 427 FE side oiler under the hood. No press releases, no VINs, just raw violence. The cars were stripped out for racing. Thin gauge steel, no sound deadening, often with fiberglass front ends. To handle the torque, they used heavy DB 4-speed, top loaders, and 9-inch rears. One version had an absurd 600-plus horsepower and could hit the quarter-mile in the 10S with slicks. These weren't prototypes for sale, they were secret missiles shipped to Ford-affiliated drag teams and never meant for the public. Ford feared government scrutiny, insurance outrage, and brand damage if the project became widely known. Most were destroyed after testing or disguised as standard cars. Few knew these beasts existed. No official records, no option codes. Just grainy photos and whispered stories in the drag racing underground. If one ever surfaced intact, it would be one of the most significant barn finds in Mustang history. And one Ford would probably prefer stayed buried. But what if you didn't need massive displacement to scare GM? What if all it took was a badge, a name, and a European identity crisis? The next Mustang wasn't American at all, at least not in name. Top 10 1969 Mustang 302 Tunnel Port Prototype, 1 of 1. Imagine a Mustang so radical even Ford's engineers were afraid of it. A car that could rev like a race engine, yet was built for the streets. It wasn't just powerful, it was experimental. And Ford buried it before the public ever saw it. In 1968, Ford developed a high-grevving 302 cubic inch V8 with massive intake ports and solid lifters, called the Tunnel Port 302. This engine was destined for Trans Am glory, replacing the aging Hi-Po 289. While most tunnel ports were stuffed into the 1968 Shelby GT350R and Boss 302 test cars, Ford quietly built one street Mustang prototype in 1969 with this exotic motor. The car featured special aluminum intake manifolds, aggressive camshaft profiles, and reworked heads originally designed for NASCAR. It also wore subtle exterior upgrades, blacked-out hood, mag wheels, and a Boscown front valance, but lacked any badges. On the surface, it looked like a slightly warmed-over GT. Underneath, it was a ticking time bomb of RPMs. Ford deemed the tunnel port engine too wild for civilian use. The engine was peaky, hard to tune, and expensive to build. The Mustang prototype was mothballed, never shown to the public, and the entire program was canceled in favor of the soon-to-come Boss 302. Only one fully street sport Mustang with the Tunnel Port 302 was ever confirmed to exist. That one-of-one prototype was quietly tucked away, stripped of its race-bred heart, and eventually dismantled. Its parts were either reused or lost to time. Today, it survives only in internal documents and a few grainy photographs. But had it launched? It could have changed everything. Ford feared the tunnel port. It was too wild, too risky, and ultimately too real. But if this one-off prototype scared the engineers, imagine how many other Mustangs never even made it past the drawing board. Some were destroyed, some were buried, and some still hiding in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered. Some Mustangs were born for the showroom, others were born for the spotlight. But these were born in shadows, whispered about in G-gradages, hidden in archives, or quietly crushed before anyone could ask questions. From outlaw prototypes to dealer-built anomalies, these forgotten machines prove one thing. Even Ford couldn't control the full Mustang legend. Thanks for riding with us through the rarest of the rare. If you enjoyed uncovering these hidden icons, hit that like button, subscribe to Muscle Cars Revolution, and tell us in the comments, which forbidden Mustang would you bring back from the grave?